Hello, and welcome to Security Basics, Burn It All and Start Over. If you're joining us live, our speakers in the Slido chat discussion area answering your questions right now. For audio or video issues, click the technical support button below. I'd now like to turn it over to John Strand for the presentation.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And this is a quick presentation that you kind of feel in the industry for quite some time, but I think it's hard for some people to identify exactly what the problem is. And the problem is that in security, we're being told what actually should be done. And there's a lot of very solid questions about whether or not what we're doing actually works. So I talk a lot about loops. We get into bad traditions of doing the exact same thing again and again and again. And we constantly get these questions anytime you're working in security of what is the best data loss prevention? What is the best antivirus? What is the best threat intelligence feed? What is the best firewall? And these get into these patterns and chiasms of us doing the exact same thing again and again and again, and somehow expecting different results in that overall process. And that's a quote that's generally attributed to Albert Einstein, and that's the definition of insanity. So in this presentation, I want to walk through what are some things your organization should actually be focusing on if you want to stop an attacker from actually breaking in. Now, this isn't meant to be exhaustive. This is just my quick 30-minute overview of what I think people should be focused on. There's still all of the standard motherhood and apple pie type things that you should be doing, but these are the big ones. And I'm going to start off with the biggest, passwords. Whenever it comes to passwords, we have tremendous issues in the industry as a whole in understanding what the effect of strong passwords are in actually stopping attackers. Unfortunately, whenever we're looking at password complexity, many organizations have requirements such as greater than 8 characters, upper lowercase alphanumeric, no dictionary word. And if that's your password policy, it's full of fail. It's very difficult to actually have a secure organization with that password complexity policy. You cannot fix this in many organizations because of politics, and people say, well, compliance. I'm going to blame PCI for this. PCI says the minimum password requirements are 7, and they do that for a lot of legacy systems and reverse compatibility, but it's incredibly problematic, especially if an organization's trying to meet the minimum. So let me give an example as far as why meeting the minimum is so problematic. This is a slide that I present on all the time. It's the NIST Green Book from 1985. So I want you to take a couple of seconds and I want you to think a little bit about what were you doing in 1985? Some of you that are at this session probably weren't even alive yet. Some of you were just very small children, and some of you had boom boxes and Furbies and what do they call them, Teddy Ruxpins and all these different things. So kind of mentally setting that stage. But if we look at the password complexity requirements from the NIST Green Book in 1985, they have this paragraph. It says L is set for 6 months and 12 months. P is set for 1 in 1 million. And that's an acceptable probability for guessing a password. And R is set for 8.5 guesses per minute. And it says at a guess rate of 8.5 guesses per minute, the guess rate possible with a 300 baud modem, the password change policy for an organization with an 8-character password is once every 6 months. And then it comes with this recommendation that says how long our passwords should be. And you have how long it's going to be in months on the left-hand side, and then how many characters. And it says 8 or 9 characters for that password. This is a password complexity document from 1985. And unfortunately, many organizations never progressed beyond this. So we need to find a way that we can start progressing beyond these core fundamentals that we get from many compliance documents and many of the conventional wisdom seers in the industry telling us what we should and should not be doing. Another example is antivirus. If you're looking at traditional antivirus, there are a number of different ways to actually bypass these different tools that we rely on every single day. It's very easy to bypass things like antivirus, data loss prevention, firewalls, and it's a lot of smoke and mirrors on how you can actually successfully implement these things in your organization. And that's driven by many vendors who like to put forth the narrative that they are finally the silver bullet, that if you're just running their product, then you're going to be able to be secure against any level of an attacker that would be targeting your organization. And I want to make it very clear that that is not true. Every year at Black Hills Information Security, we do a presentation called Sacred Cash Cow Tipping, where we go through all the major endpoint vendors and we bypass those vendors usually the night before the presentation. And we take, usually it's like the top 10 or 15, and we come up with bypass techniques. And we have previous bypass techniques and previous sessions that we've archived on a number of our different websites. But if you're running any of these products, whether it's a next-gen product, if you're running something like Cylance or CrowdStrike or any of these other tools, they're great tools, but you need to understand that they can be bypassed. And if you understand this, this actually creates a fundamental shift in your thinking on computer security. Because if you're just relying on a vendor, one single vendor on the endpoint to keep you secure, you're going to be running into trouble because that particular tool can, in fact, be bypassed relatively easily as well. So if we're going to move forward, we need to move beyond just looking at single point solutions like antivirus, data loss prevention, firewalls, threat intelligence feeds, and we need to start leaving these things behind. And if we were going to put these things and we were going to change them and we were going to do it new again, what would we actually do that would be maybe a change on a theme, not completely changing everything that we're doing, but trying to change things up a little bit so we can get out of these bad loops and these bad patterns. So I'm going to start with some things that are relatively unpopular. Let's start with internet whitelisting. Now, anytime I mention internet whitelisting, it's very common for people to pull out the pitchforks and the torches and the angry mob that you see here. And they'll say, oh, your presentation is bad and you should feel bad. However, I want you to take a couple of steps back. Internet blacklisting will not work, ever. The only thing that it does is it shows that an organization is exercising due diligence to stop their people from going to bad websites while at work. For actually stopping legitimate attackers, targeted attackers, standard blacklist is next to worthless. And we know this because we do anywhere between 450 to 550 security assessments per year. And the organizations that are just using traditional blacklist techniques are very, very easy to break into. Specifically, you're going to want to look at the uncategorized list. Now, the uncategorized list, and it might have different names for your web application proxy vendor that you're actually using. And the uncategorized means that your web proxy vendor has never seen this website. They haven't categorized it as a news website, a shopping website, a social media website. They've never seen it. And I want to make it very clear that a Forcepoint or Cisco or somebody that's a very large vendor has never seen a website. That is a website you do not want your user population going to. And if you uncheck that and you don't allow your users to go to the uncategorized websites, you can allow them to go to the standard news websites and the shopping websites they would go to. But as soon as you start restricting uncategorized, it makes it more difficult for an attacker to actually break into your organization. Yes, you can do this. Trust me, it's not that hard. And the vast majority of the sites that fall into uncategorized, once again, are not websites that you ever want your user population to go to. And this is not a new idea. In fact, Marcus Ranum was talking about this 13 or over 13 years ago. He was talking about enumerating badness is a dumb idea in computer security. It was not smart then, and it is still not smart today. We need to get away from dealing with traditional blacklist technologies. So let's play a game, right? If we're going to look at this as kind of a thought exercise, how many websites do your legitimate users or legitimate websites do your users go to? Do they go to 200? Say 500, 1,000, 2,000? Find out. On your day-to-day basis, you're going to find out that the vast majority of your user population is actually going to the exact same websites again and again. Human beings are definitely creatures of habit. I probably have about 20 websites that I visit very regularly. And I don't spend a lot of time just clicking on random links like find more about mortgages in your area. And they show a picture of a cute little puppy. And everyone's like, I'm going to click on that puppy. You don't really want your users doing that type of casual web surfing. But if you look at where your users are going for legitimate websites, it's not going to be very many. And let's say hypothetically that you just allowed users to go to them. Like you popped up something and it said, hey, you're going to a website, I haven't seen it before. Are you sure you want to go? Yes or no. They click yes. Even if you allowed the inmates to run the asylum, you would still be far more secure than a blacklist approach. Why? Because attackers will take advantage of websites. They'll try to create websites that look legitimate. They're going to try to set up command and control websites with names that, will blend in on an organization. And we can actually take advantage of those to gain access to your environment. But if you're just restricting it to where people go, or you're shutting off uncategorized, once again, it drastically reduces your overall exposure to attack. For filtering, here's just a quick example. We have categories like adware, alcohol, anonymizer, art, gaming, but here's the big one right here that says uncategorized in the lower right-hand corner. You want to make sure that your users can't go to the uncategorized website category. So let's move on to something else that people get really uncomfortable with, application whitelisting. This is another category of security implementation that people just run away from screaming. And they run from it screaming because they think it's hard. And they believe it to be hard because of one simple thing. Because they believe that application whitelisting is exclusively about filtering on file hashes. We're going to go through and identify every single application and every single dynamic link library, every shared object library, and every single system on your environment, and you're only going to allow those through and only going to allow those to execute. Well, you could do it that way, but there's actually better ways to go about doing it. In fact, one of the ways I'm going to show you on the next slide is actually fairly simple to implement as well. So instead of getting away from this binary view of we have to do it this one way with hashes, we can open it up a little bit. We can actually do this based on directory, which is what I'm going to show you. And you're going to have people in the security community, they'll say, well, I can bypass application whitelisting if you're allowing it by directory. Yeah, they probably could. But it is far more difficult than just allowing everything to execute on your system. So let me show you. So here's the default rules that Windows 10 creates in AppLocker. Within AppLocker, the default rules will be everyone can execute all the programs. You can see it here. It says program files. And if you have older systems, it can be program files x86. Everyone can execute all the files in the Windows directory. That's where your operating system files exist. And then the administrator can execute anything anywhere that they want. Turns out that this particular set of restrictions just on directories is incredibly difficult for attackers to get past. Now, there are techniques like ISR evil grade attacks, actually exploiting specific applications and the vulnerabilities, but your drive-by downloads become far more difficult because they're going to try to land and execute in temporary folders like temporary internet folders as well. This is the easiest way to implement application whitelisting, or allow listing, as some people are calling it, and I'm an advocate of that as well. This is a way that we can actually do that, and we can implement it in a way as far as baby steps. We implement allow listing on directories, and as we get better, maybe we can move up to digital code signing certificates and publisher verification. We don't have to jump straight into validation of hashes. And ultimately, when we're looking at security, it's all about architecture. If you look at the history of structural engineering and architecture, it is a history of failure. It is a history of understanding the failure points for every single component that you put into an architecture. Every beam, every column, every door, everything has a failure point. And structural engineers design their architectures in such a way that there's overlapping support that doesn't create failure in just one place. We have failure points. We develop mitigations. We identify weaknesses, and we develop mitigations for those weaknesses. And we have that overlapping field of visibility and that overlapping field of structural support, and things can get better. Let's take a couple of seconds and let's talk about compliance. James and Kelly Taralla at Enclave Security are the main people behind the 20 critical controls. And they have some amazing spreadsheets that will help you implement the 20 critical controls and do it in an easy way. So if you want to, just Google Enclave or Audit Scripts 20 critical controls, and they have things like master mapping documents that'll map the 20 critical controls to every single audit framework on the face of the planet. The reason why this is in this presentation is I run into organizations all the time that have 5 or 6 audit frameworks that they have to be in compliance with, and they go crazy trying to keep them up to date. But with the 20 critical controls, we created these years ago at the SANS Institute. We wanted to create a Rosetta Stone, and that's really what James and Kelly have done. So you can map to the 20 critical controls, and then it automatically maps to all the other frameworks. So check that out. Speaking of mapping, the MITRE ATT&CK technique matrix is monstrous because now we're starting to develop a taxonomy of what attackers do. And what I recommend that people do is do threat emulation. If you look at vulnerability assessments, many times vulnerability assessments will only hit like 2 squares out of the entire MITRE ATT&CK technique matrix. When an attacker gains access to your environment, they're going to do all kinds of things like password spraying, lateral movement. They're going to try to execute code on remote systems and pull data out of the environment. And with the MITRE ATT&CK technique matrix, you have the ability to look at what you can actually prevent in your environment. And if you do emulation with tools like Caldera or tools like Atomic Red Team or commercial tools like Scythe, which make it very easy to execute, you can actually start emulating what a real attacker would do and all the techniques that an attacker would run through. And you can start doing a gap analysis insofar as what your organization can detect. So check those tools out. Firewalls, another semi-controversial thing. Why is it that your computers are more secure at a coffee shop than they are at work? You see, whenever you go to a coffee shop, your computer recognizes that it's in an unsecured open network. So it throws its firewall up and it doesn't trust any of the other computer systems in that coffee shop. But whenever it comes to work, it's just like, shut the firewall off. Anyone can connect to me. You need to start treating your internal network as hostile because it is hostile. There's no good reason at all for all of your workstations to talk to each other, ever. Let me explain. So if you look at your standard exploit, the attacker delivers a client-side exploit or a drive-by download and compromises one computer system on the inside of the environment. Then an attacker or a pen tester is going to move laterally to a whole bunch of other workstations. We do this because we take our credentials and move from system to system to system. And we do this specifically because we're trying to escalate privileges to get to domain administrator. So I'll move with psexec, pass the token, remote desktop, pass the hash. And the whole goal of me doing this is to gain access to those systems to try to take over the entire domain. And most of the time, organizations are not able to detect this type of lateral movement, unfortunately. However, if you treat your internal network as hostile, once again, because it is, then it makes that lateral movement far more difficult for the attacker. They'll gain access to a system and maybe they're locked into one specific business unit, or maybe you have your host-based firewalls enabled in your environment, or maybe your antivirus, which has a firewall, you can remotely manage that. You can put on a number of rules on your firewall that say your workstations can talk to servers. Your server subnets, help desk subnets, administrator subnets can talk to workstations. But workstations cannot ever talk to each other. That's the type of firewall rule set that we need to have in our environment. Because if we do that, some magical things occur. As soon as we gain access to that one system, as soon as we start doing lateral movement with psexec, pass the token, WMI, remote desktop, all those firewalls are protecting those systems. Not only are they protecting those systems, but they are also serving as points of detection of that lateral movement. So if we tie this back to the MITRE ATT&CK technique matrix, there's an entire column of lateral movement. This would deny the attacker the vast majority of those techniques that deal with lateral movement. Now, once again, going back to passwords, we started with that as one of the key things. The only thing that matters when you're dealing with passwords is length. You'll get into these long conversations of upper, lowercase, alphanumeric, special characters, don't allow dictionary words, don't allow this, don't allow that. The only thing that matters is length, folks. Make your password 16 characters long, allow people to use dictionary words, but keep the upper, lower, special case numeric numbers, and your passwords are going to be far more secure than a shorter, quote unquote, more complicated password that they would have in place. You see, if you actually get to the point where you don't allow people to use dictionary words and you're requiring upper lowercase alphanumeric special characters, your users will start keyboard patterns. And when they do keyboard patterns, they'll actually coalesce on a handful of keyboard patterns, and you'll have like far less entropy in your overall passwords than if you just let people come up with passphrases on their own. Next up, let's talk about two-factor authentication. This is one of those things that we're starting to see implemented in organizations, albeit slower than we would like, but two-factor authentication will absolutely shut down many attackers. Now, there are bypass techniques, right? You can run things like Evil Nginx, you can run things like CredKing to try to intercept that two-factor authentication, but it will make the attack far more difficult to gain access to an environment. So try to implement this. It can be via SMS notification, even though people say SMS notification for two-factor is horrible. It's better than nothing. You can use Google Authenticator. You can use Duo. There's a ton of different technologies that are out there. And you might get some pushback in your organization as to whether or not you should do this. And I would encourage you to share the article from Teen Vogue that says two-factor authentication is very important. If we can't meet a security standard, can we at least meet the Teen Vogue standards? I mean, come on, Teen Vogue. Let's talk about smarter logging. So if we're looking at logging, I'm going to set you up a quick trick that you can set up in your environment that's going to detect your next internal assumed compromise assessment or your pen test. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to create a user in your environment. Give it an obvious name. In this situation, I called my user admin ADM administrator, trying to be right on the nose that this is an account that's called the administrator account. Then I'm going to disable all the login hours. So you can't actually log into this account ever. And then you set up alerting in your SIEM that if anybody ever tries to log into that account, they will immediately generate an alert. And this is what it looks like. This is a tool called Domain Password Spray by Bull Bullock or Daft Hack. It automatically pulls down a full user list of every single user ID in your environment and then attempts a single password against that account. So you can see here, it says it's password spraying with a password of probably spring, 2017 in this screenshot. And it's trying every single user account. Just by simply trying to authenticate to that account automatically, it can generate an alert. And when it does, you could do something like lock that workstation down. This is an amazing bit of cyber deception where you can set a tripwire that will absolutely attack, or not attack, it will detect an adversary that is attacking you very quickly post-exploitation. Why? Well, we're setting this trap in a place where adversaries go. Password spraying is in the bag of tools that almost every single attacker uses against your environment and every other environment every single day. And if we set this up internally, it is one of the tricks that they use to try to move laterally. And you'll be able to detect that lateral movement immediately. Once again, tying back to the MITRE ATT&CK technique matrix. Also, with logging, use Sysmon. I cannot stress enough just how incredibly worthless standard event logging actually is. In fact, if you look at the Verizon data breach report, something like 1% of all the breaches that they worked were detected by their SIEM. And that's because there's no event ID that says, event ID 666, you've been hacked. It doesn't exist. But Sysmon gives you amazing fidelity for free out of the box. So here's an example of a Sysmon log. We have the process ID, the executable, the full path to it, the file version, the description within that file, what that product is, what the name of that particular file is. We also have the hashes of that file that executed. With this, we finally have the level of logging that we've always wanted in computer security. So please do me a favor, start logging Sysmon. All of your major SIEM vendors will support it. And you might get into an argument of, well, would we be logging too much at that point? Look, most of what you're logging is garbage. Here, another exercise. I want you to look at the logs that you're collecting right now in your organization. What percentage of those logs have an alert, a signature, or a report associated with them? You're going to find out that probably 95% of the logs that you're collecting have no alert, have no report, have no signature. You're just collecting and storing them like some twisted hoarder who has garbage all over their house with long fingernails and, talks to aliens. So you need to get away from being an InfoSec hoarder. Instead, you need to start logging the right things. So log the things that matter, and Sysmon is absolutely something that matters. So when we're talking about these different things, it seems like it's difficult. And there's this analogy that people talk about all the time. How do you go about eating an elephant? Well, you shouldn't try to go to straight implementation right off the bat. You don't want to jump to, hey, we're going to implement Carbon Black everywhere. We're going to try to implement Tripwire everywhere. We'll see a lot of organizations that try to jump to implementing a full security posture of hash-based application allow listing. You see organizations that try to jump straight to do full segmentation and isolation on every system in one shot. Take it apart piece by piece. Roll out your security implementation with different networks, business units, and geographic locations. Roll them out. Start with your security team, move to the administrators, move to help desk. Roll these things out slowly in your environment, and you're going to have a much better time implementing them as a whole. All right, protect yourself. One of the things I also recommend is you need to protect yourself at home, especially whenever we're looking at the world of COVID that exists today, where many of us are in fact now working from home, and we may be accessing our organizational resources from a personal browser. You have to protect yourself. Look at things like AdBlock Plus. Open DNS at home, keep your systems patched, use a passphrase, don't run strange programs. Yes, Microsoft antivirus is just fine. Never talk to anybody who says they work for Microsoft tech support, but you all know that. What I encourage you all to do is share the simple ideas on this slide with your friends and your family. Share this idea with your children and nieces and nephews and grandchildren so we can start getting better at securing not just our organizational assets, but us as a whole. Because here's the deal. If you look at computer security is not just a corporate problem. Computer security and the problem that we have is an education and awareness problem. And we desperately need our education and our awareness to extend far beyond the boundaries of the organizations that we work for. And it has to start going to friends and family. And all of you that are listening and watching this video right now, you are the pointy edge of the spear. You are the best and brightest in computer security. And it's incumbent upon all of you that are watching this video to go forth and try to teach people how to be secure, not just at work, but in their everyday lives. Because if they're not secure at home, they're not going to be secure in our organizations either. So the apply slide, moving forward. Let's stop doing the standard things that we've been doing. The traditional defenses, the SIMs, the AVs, the standard firewalls just on the edge of our network that get out of date quickly. Let's start trying to fix things like passwords with longer lengths, and let's move to two-factor authentication. Let's look to what actual attackers do, and let's start emulating what those actual attackers do to stop those attacks. Let's use MITRE. Let's use Caldera. Let's use SIDE. Let's use Atomic Red Team. Improve your logging and set some traps in your organization as well. That's what I'm ultimately asking all of you to do. And this was a quick presentation. And I just want to say thank you so much for sitting through this presentation and listening. My email is john@bhis.co. I'm on Twitter because everybody's on Twitter. And yeah, you even have my phone number. You have a question, don't hesitate to pick up the phone and call me. So once again, I want to say thank you very much, and I hope you have a great and safe conference.